Intimate Judaism deals with sensitive topics and uses explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Intimate Judaism. I'm Rabbi Scott Kahn.
I'm Tali Rosenbaum. Today we're going to have kind of a part two of the episode that we did last month on sexual desire discrepancies. We said that we were going to speak about everything but the emotional relationship and the attachment of the couple, and that this month we were going to specifically focus on emotional relationship, attachment, emotional intimacy, and how that all relates to sexual desire in couples. And we have a very special guest, Dr. Laurie Watson.
We'll get to that interview in just a moment. First, remember to check out our website, intimatejudaism.com, for the full podcast archive, show notes, a free men's mikveh, checklist, and more. Subscribe to Intimate Judaism wherever you get your podcasts. Rate and review, leave a comment, and tell people about Intimate Judaism, and share the podcast so that we can continue to grow our audience. Write to us at intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com. Make sure to visit jewishcoffeehouse.com and talirosenbaum.com. Dr. Laurie Watson is the Director of Awakenings, a certified sex therapist, Doctor of Sexology, a certified EFT therapist, and a certified addictions specialist. She has 30 years of experience working with couples and individuals about love and sex. Laurie is the host of the popular podcast, Foreplay Radio, Couples and Sex Therapy, ranked in the top 10 in iTunes under sexuality, and has over 10 million downloads. Furthermore, Laurie authored her first book, Wanting Sex Again, How to Rediscover Desire and Heal a Sexless Marriage, in December 2012. As a popular blogger for the general public, she has over 40 million reads between her WebMD blog and Psychology Today Online in Married and Still Doing It. And now we're pleased to present our interview with Dr. Laurie Watson. Dr. Laurie Watson, thank you very much for joining us today on Intimate Judaism.
Oh, it is my honor to be with you.
I also want to welcome you to Intimate Judaism, to our podcast.
Tali, it's so lovely to be with you, actually.
Thank
After so
you.
many years of following your good work and, your wisdom and knowledge, you have been such a contributor to our field. Thank you.
Thank you so much for saying that. I do want to tell our listeners that you're a very special guest. You have a podcast together with George Fowler.
Yes.
It's called the Foreplay Radio podcast. It's quite a popular podcast. And I think what I'd love for you to do is just talk for a couple minutes about your approach, what you talk about in your work together with George Fowler, and then we can kind of get right into the questions.
Sure. George and I, it's actually Couples and Sex Therapy, our podcast, Foreplay Couples and Sex Therapy. And we really, in our teaching, we teach actually around the world, and we teach on the podcast about the integration of sexual desire, sexual connection, and emotional connection, and how these two behavioral cycles and forces are really a part of love, two parts of love in committed relationships. So, we spend a great deal of thinking together about how do these interact, how do they influence each other. And I have met and had the honor also of meeting Girit Birnbaum, who is the Israeli premier attachment researcher, and her work has been very influential in terms of thinking about how attachment is formed by sexual and emotional connection.
That really works out well for us. We did an episode together talking about desire and desire discrepancies, but we really decided to wait with the dynamic and couples and relational aspects. And we did a general overview where we spoke about what are the different contributors kind of on an individual level, less on a relational level, to desire from a psychological, biological, and certainly cultural point of view. We spend a lot of time talking about culture and also religion and how that can affect our sexual experience, our sense of self sexually. But we did mention that I certainly work that way as well as a couples and sex therapist, that often there are sexual issues that come up as kind of a byproduct of relational issues. And often sexual issues can contribute to relational issues.
Absolutely.
This whole idea of having different attachment styles and different ways of soothing and kind of looking at the whole dynamic of the partner. And also this idea of emotionally focused therapy. I thought, what better than an expert on emotionally focused therapy than you to come on and teach us and speak to us about your wisdom and your work around addressing sexual desire disorders with that lens of emotionally focused therapy, and talking about the attachment and the dance and everything that you have to offer. So I know that's a big question, but that's really just an introduction. I think I'm going to let you, Scott, go ahead, and unless you want to respond to that first, Laurie, and then we can go more specifically into questions.
Yes, well, I would love to talk about that. And emotionally focused therapy is really applied attachment therapy or applied attachment theory. And it I came to it late. I've been working from attachment theory for a long time, but this application is so smart and has helped me so much, both personally and professionally, really understand the negative cycles that couples can get into and how they interrelate. And it just makes so much sense. So I am happy to talk about all of that.
Let's start off by asking a question that I asked Tali in our previous episode, and I'd like to ask you, Laurie, as well, because we're talking about discrepancies in desire and sexual desire.
Yes.
The question that we first have to really analyze is, what does desire actually mean? Because that word can mean a whole lot of things, whether we're speaking about a cognitive process, whether we're speaking about a physical process. So for you, can you start us off by defining what we mean by desire?
I think very simply that we feel and want our partner. We feel sexual want for our partner. It doesn't necessarily mean my body feels something, but my mind, my heart, and potentially my body as well want to be with this person sexually.
Okay, I actually want to ask about something that Tali said a moment ago when she mentioned the word disorders, when she talked about desire discrepancy disorders. And the reason I'm asking about that is because sometimes these discrepancies can be the result of what we might call a disorder, a serious problem. But at other points, it might simply be part of the regular attachment or relational cycle that people go through as a normal part of life. Using that, I'd like to ask you, Laurie, could you talk about some of the reasons that are normal that couples might experience a discrepancy in sexual desire, and some of the reasons that may be considered less typical or normal, and for which a couple may be advised to go to therapy?
Sure. I mean, we all know that desire waxes and wanes for most of us at different periods of stressful periods, maybe after childbirth, with disease states. I mean, there are reasons that physiologically our desire gets repressed. But overall, Scott, I really believe that desire is a quantity that is between the couple. So both of them play into it. Both of them contribute to that sense of aliveness or deadness sexually by how they're interacting, both emotionally and sexually with each other. So when I'm treating a couple, I really don't think about it as a discrete dysfunction. I think about it as something that is going on in the cycle between the couple. I always think of it that way. And I understand that, I do a great deal of work with breast cancer survivors. And obviously the treatment for breast cancer is so problematic for a woman's sexual desire. But it turns out really that how her partner responds to her is the greatest healing force for her sexual desire. So, is it solely because of this? I mean, terrible, terrible disease. And yes, very problematic, but it turns out we can heal each other. And that's, I think, the beautiful news when I think about attachment and I think about the work of EFT is we have the power to heal each other and to bring aliveness and vitality to our sexual relationship.
I think that our listeners, when they write to us, they want to know, what do we do about having this discrepancy between us?
Yes.
We've talked about it before. We've talked a lot about how to provide erotic empathy for the partner who is not going to be able to get as much sex and intimacy as they might want, and also understanding for the partner and not taking personally the fact that your partner may not be available for that. We do need to recognize that what does often happen is that the lower desire partner does get pathologized.
Mm-hmm.
There's something wrong with my partner. What's wrong with my partner that they don't want to have sex with me? And then what happens is that there's a turnaround from the other partner trying to pathologize back. I don't know what you're
Yes.
talking about. We just, you must be a sex addict because
Right. We just had sex 10 days ago. Right.
right.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'd love you to address that. I also want you to give a overview of attachment styles. Not everybody listening is going to be very familiar with this idea of attachment and what attachment styles are. So a review of that would be great.
Okay, we've got so many exciting things to talk about. I think attachment styles are basically how we come out of childhood. And insecure attachments, if we come out of childhood with parents who were loving to each other, affectionate with us appropriately, and provided stability economically, a roof over our heads, food stability, most of the time we have this internal model that people are safe, our needs are okay, and we can trust that the other person wants to meet our needs. And so we come out kind of with a hopeful, optimistic view of the world. But oftentimes, let's say there's kind of two ends of the spectrum, and that's more avoidantly attached and anxiously attached. These are insecure attachment styles. So avoidantly attached styles, oftentimes our parents were very neglectful, consistently neglectful, or potentially invasive. And so we come out of that childhood feeling like, okay, our needs are not okay. In fact, it's much safer to pretend that we don't have any needs. And we kind of block our consciousness even to our needs. So if you ask an avoidant person, how do you feel about that? What do you want? The most classic answer is going to be, I don't know. And genuinely, they often don't know. And then for an anxiously attached person, they often come out of a childhood where there's kind of intermittent care, but it's not consistent, and they tend to feel like, okay, I am somehow or another not good enough for my needs to be met, and they feel more frantic. I think about babies. So sometimes there are good babies and crying babies, and we all love good babies, but sometimes good babies are more avoidantly attached. They have learned that if I coo and gurgle, I am more apt to get attention, whereas crying babies kind of tell themselves, I don't care who attends to me. I don't care if it's angry mommy face or angry daddy face that comes, just so long as I have a face that comes, and they will cry and cry and cry and protest. Then as we grow up, oftentimes even securely attached people are a little bit on either end of this spectrum. And we have defense structures that develop out of this that push and withdraw. Our survival, we learn, is, it's better for us to maybe withdraw and cool things down, or maybe it's better for us to push through, pursue our partner to get some response. And this pursue withdraw style is impacted by our attachment styles. It feels like survival to us. And when our partner, let's say our partner goes away a little bit, maybe they're just even preoccupied. They're not intending to leave us. But that preoccupation can make us feel like, uh-oh, something's wrong. And so if I'm a pursuer, anxiously attached, which I would admit that I am, I'm going to go for it and kind of like, what's wrong? I'm going to check in. If I don't get the response that I am looking for, I might escalate that. Hey, I've noticed you've been preoccupied for a day now, and I'm really starting to feel bad about this. You're not kind of participating with us, and my escalation starts to become a little more critical. If my partner, who is a withdrawer, who I've said to, my audience on the podcast, which he is, he starts to hear that escalation and that criticism as danger, danger, danger. I better really lock it down a little bit. I don't dare tell her what's going on and what I'm feeling, so I'm going to just cool things off. I'm going to back away further. So this dynamic, which is impacted from our childhoods, my husband's family was pretty cool, and did not attend to his needs. And my family of origin was kind of hot, and so there was this chaos, and I just learned like the only way to survive was to fight, and the only way to survive was to flee. And so, we can get into that push pull. And it turns out that sexually as well, there's a similar push pull cycle. So many times and for many reasons, we are crisscrossed. My husband and I actually are congruent. So I'm a sexual pursuer and an emotional pursuer. He's a sexual withdrawer and an emotional withdrawer. That doesn't mean, thankfully, that he doesn't like sex with me, but that his survival style under threat is to pull away. And so let's think about that. I think many heterosexual couples, there are different influences on females. And, oftentimes she maybe really push for emotional connection and feels okay about that and is familiar with talking and sharing feelings as a way she gets closeness. And her partner may be also trained to be independent, to keep feelings inside, that's the strong male image. He doesn't necessarily share feelings as easily, but his body has a drive because of testosterone that pushes him sexually. And I want to just say, I don't think sexual desire is all about testosterone, but typically maybe he feels this is a place that I feel love. When my body is sexually involved, I feel such deep connection. And so he comes forward and he pursues sexually. And we know through the research that women need emotional connection oftentimes before they want to be sexual. And so she's like, whoa, I'm not ready for this. So she withdraws, she backs up. And these cycles crisscross. She becomes a sexual withdrawer, also not meaning that she doesn't like sex or doesn't feel desire and attraction to her partner, but she's maybe waiting on something in order to feel that sense of connection, but she's pulling back right when he's coming forward. And it's so ironic, right? We want so much from our partner, and the moment they come forward, but they come forward in a different way of love, a sexual way of love. It's like, wait a second, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So they pull back, which dysregulates their husband, their male partner, who's like, wait a second, for me, sex is love. You say you want to be with me, you want to, connect with me, and I'm trying to connect with you. And it's just mysterious. Like, how is it that we get so tangled up in this? And of course, then there's hurt, there's misunderstanding, there's heartbreak, and these two cycles, just when we might have the moment to really feel love from our partner, we turn it down or we get rebuffed, we get rejected. And then it's like, why do I want to put myself out there again?
Laurie, there's a lot that you just said. That's really, really fascinating. I'm trying to digest it all.
I know I've said a whole lot right now.
No, it's great. I'm the layperson here, though, so I might ask questions that may be obvious to you and Tali. Because these attachment styles, as you described them, are largely nurtured in us from our childhood, from our babyhood, in fact. So how can that be overcome? Meaning these attachment styles can lead to these discrepancies and these communication problems and all the attendant consequences of that. And yet it's fundamentally a part of who we are. And we don't want to change who we are and may become a different person. That's probably not a healthy situation either. So what is a way that a couple who has these different attachment styles, whether they're a pursuer or withdrawer or whichever one we're talking about, how can they enable the communication to take place in such a way that they're not changing who they are fundamentally and feeling like they're falsifying themselves, but at the same time, enabling a greater understanding between the couple to overcome the discrepancy in a way that they're both happy?
Yeah. It turns out that marriage provides us many, many opportunities to resolve our childhood attachment styles. That the hope, I think, of a marital partnership is really to become secure. That, yes, these themes come up over and over again for us. And every time it's an opportunity to heal and to do something different that changes it. Kind of the Freudian concept of, history repeats itself. And it's true. Our relationship dynamics often do repeat, but every time in marriage, we have an opportunity to do something different. And so, it's really difficult. And sometimes we don't know what we should do that's different. Does that mean as a sexual withdrawer, I just need to give my partner sex whenever they ask and that's going to heal everything? Probably not. Or does that mean I'm an emotional withdrawer and I just need to get in touch with my emotions? I have no idea how to do that. I haven't been trained to do that. So there are actually micro moves that we teach people how to change this so that in the moment they can become secure. And the beautiful thing, Scott, is that when we experience secure attachment, even momentary secure attachment with our partner, our brain retrains itself. So it's almost like it cuts a new neural pathway. It's like, oh, this feels so much better. I don't need to resort to my survival instinct, my protective mechanisms to actually be with my partner. So maybe we should break it down to an example. I think that would help. Okay. I'm writing a book, and my first example is of this couple who is a classic crisscross style couple. And, she comes home from her day kind of wanting to unload on her husband what happened with some girlfriends. She got her feelings hurt. One of the girls kind of made an implication that she was fat. And really what she wants from her husband is to say, you're hot, baby, and I think you're great. But actually what she does is she tells him a long story about what happened. And he, as an emotional withdrawer, starts to get anxious and nervous. He knows that these conversations don't go well. And so as he starts to listen to all the details, his blood pressure rises, his ears start to kind of drum. And he's like, I know I'm not supposed to fix it. I know I'm not supposed to offer any advice, but he doesn't actually know what to do as she starts to tell this day. Now he's come home from his work a little bit early. He's going to play with the kids. He's thinking, this is awesome. She always wants me to get home early. So this will be our night. I'm going to be able to sexually connect with her. So his whole heart and body is going toward an evening of sexual connection. So as she talks about it, his eyes start to glaze over. He's anxious. He doesn't really know how to respond. Suddenly, she begins to recognize the eye glaze over and gets angry. Like, okay, maybe you think I'm fat too. Now what she hasn't done in the telling of the story is she hasn't asked from a vulnerable place. Hey, my feelings got hurt. This woman indicated I was heavy and, I'm really angry at her. And I really need from you to tell me that you think I look beautiful, desirable. So she hasn't come from a place of vulnerability, hasn't really let him know what he can do, and then as the evening progresses, they have a big blow up, big fight. He says, forget it. And he does what he does best. And he says, you just need to figure this out with your friends, right? The worst thing to say. He goes off, but in the evening, he's like aware of the disconnect. He knows she's hurting, he's hurting. His body tells him, how do I reconnect with her? And so he starts to think about that. I love her. I desire her. Sex makes us feel so much better. After sex, we're so connected. And so in bed that evening, he knows she's still awake. He reaches over to her, touches her shoulder, thinking and feeling more empowered to reconnect because he has sexual desire. He's like, okay, even as he thinks about it, his desire kind of makes him courageous. I want to reconnect. Touches her. She immediately throws back, what are you thinking? You're thinking about sex right now? You haven't talked to me all night. You hurt my feelings. Additionally, forget it. And she rolls over further away from the bed. And he says, to himself and to her, you never want sex. Forget it. I was trying to comfort you. You don't get it. And then this couple completely emotionally and sexually disconnected. So what I want to do, I want to take this couple and help them reveal their inner vulnerabilities, what they really want from each other, right? So the woman wanted reassurance. If she could have said that, and if she could have talked to him about, this is where I'm starting from, this is what I need from you, he would have had sort of the intel as to where this conversation is going rather than, how am I going to solve this problem of her friends doing this? If he had come to her and said, baby, I did want to connect with you. I do want to be your comfort. I really care about you, and I do think you're hot. And, my body tells me that if we could make love, maybe things would feel better for you. I could soothe you. I could comfort you, and we would feel better together. If he would reveal his own motive, she might soften and see that he's coming toward her with a motive of love, not just, I think many times it's interpreted as all you want is sex. All you want is to get off. You don't care about me. But many, many times I see the motive for sexuality as an effort to reach our partners, to be deeply connected with them in a way that makes the most sense in our brain.
Laurie, I'll give the floor to you in a moment, Tali. I just want to say, first of all, that example was so detailed and therefore so effective. It really helped explain things to me, so thank you. But this also dovetails with something that Tali said in our last episode, that at least according to the research that I think she has done or that she's seen, that women often think in a situation where there is a sexual discrepancy or desire discrepancy, think, my husband just wants me for sex, what you just said right now. And yep. Tali was saying that when she's presented that to men, they're like, that's absolutely not true. I don't want you just to be my vessel.
I don't want you to just be the means through which I achieve my sexual desire.
I actually want to have that connection, that discrepancy in terms of the way they think, that assumption that he just wants me for sex and it's not about me. It's just a means for him to do it, can be the cause of more stress. And I think what you said really relates to that as well.
So in secure attachment, we have two motives for sex. We have the motive for pleasure, genital pleasure. We also have the motive for heart intimacy, both of them. In insecure attachment, we're often motivated by two other. Well, it's a quadrant. It's a little bit maybe more complicated, but it's like anxiously attached people are often motivated for approval. Like I want you to want me. So maybe before marriage, many times, in some cultures, there's lots of hookups, but it's not necessarily for pleasure. It's really to get love, to get approval, to feel like they're desirable. And to express intimacy. And many times avoidantly attached people are having sex for coping reasons. Like I use it as a sleeping pill. I want to go to bed. I do want to have an orgasm so that I can get to sleep and pleasure, but they forget the motive of intimacy. But what Tali, I believe you have experienced, and I as well in therapy, is many, many men really do have both motives of wanting intimacy and pleasure, and that makes so much sense to their bodies and to their hearts, and they're not just wanting to use their partner.
Yeah, I would add to that the cultural contributor here of masculine messages about men wanting just sex and women having to kind of be obligated to provide it. And sometimes women come in with, whether it's traditional religious messages or even Western societal messages, that when men are interested in sex, they are really not in a vulnerable place. They are in their manly place of wanting, when in fact, it's actually a really vulnerable place for men to be. It's why they tend to hold back. So they hold back, and there's this kind of ongoing holding back on each side. So it becomes a power struggle. She says, you don't talk to me. You're not with me. You're not being intimate with me. And then you want me to have sex. And he's just afraid of rejection, because how much rejection can a person put up with? It's this idea of being able to, I like what you said before about being able to meet each other with vulnerability, with openness, with kind of this creation of safety. And when we can do that in the room, it's a very beautiful thing. I think we also have to recognize that baseline attachment security is not always present in the relationship to begin with. And
that's right.
So that needs to be looked at, because if you don't feel safe, if your partner has a personality disorder, or doesn't have the skills because of being, just doesn't have the skills, not because they're a bad person, but maybe there's some reasons for them not having either empathy skills or social skills, then you've been kind of failed so many times that you've created so many defense mechanisms that coming into the therapy space and being asked to put your weapons down just feels too risky for both partners.
Yes, you're right. And by the time people get to us, couples get to us, they have been doing this war or this cycle, this negative cycle for sometimes 20 years, and it seems very difficult to put the weapons down or put aside our protective feelings. I think that as a therapist, obviously in the beginning, I kind of serve as that transitional object. I'm the one who can see both sides. And I think you're right about initiating sexually is such a vulnerable act. I mean, I'm coming to my partner and I'm saying, I want to be naked with you. I want you to give me an orgasm. I want, I want to be with you in this deep way. I mean, I'm not sure that there are many more vulnerable things than saying that. Sexuality is kind of this crossroads of our romantic relationship and our childhood. In childhood, oftentimes I see people who really did not have appropriate and enough affectional love as children. And so there are two ways that we go with that. So one is I will get that in my relationship. And I think that men do have a second chance in life because of the testosterone push. Like they might not have had a mother who tended to them in a loving, affectionate way, stroking his hair, giving him lots of hugs and kisses goodnight and tucking him in bed and all of that. But testosterone says, I will get this. Whereas women, if we grow up without that affection, I think what happens as children is we take this kind of inner vow. I'm not going to need that. And then in adolescence, when, we develop and puberty hits, it's like that is not transforming. It doesn't push us to go for it. And so in marriage, maybe in the beginning of marriage, there's this excitement that kind of overcomes those difficulties right at the beginning. But then later, our older, more difficult childhood patterns emerge. And it's like, you know what? It is not safe to ask. It is not safe to want. And I think, yes, men are often not socialized with good communication techniques, and women are also not socialized to know their bodies, to have erotic tools, to think about that eroticism is a development. It's not something that happens. Sex is actually not natural. We have so much learning to do about it. It's a lifelong learning experience. And, and so, I mean, I think there's both things, right? As a woman, I may have listened to, if I want it, I'm a slut. If I don't want it, I'm frigid. It's really a difficult place to walk in. And I don't know how to get information. I'm sure that your podcast gives a lot of good information about sexuality to people. So this is one good place. But most people in our culture and even in our families don't grow up with good information about what do I do with these feelings? What do they mean? How does my body even work? And what do I do when I also need something emotionally in order to feel something sexual? How do I communicate this in a way that doesn't hurt and reject my partner? And I would say, and I want to have a shout out, there are about 20% of the women that I see in my practice who really are more of the sexual pursuer. They do want sex more than their partners. And they're very confused by kind of the shutdown of their male partner. I think there's very little talk about that. And I think it's so painful because if your girlfriends are all saying, my husband wants me all the time, can't keep his hands off me, you're the only person at the party who's like, ooh, I'm not going to talk about that. My husband doesn't want me. The only thing I can conclude is that I'm not attractive, or I'm not attractive to my partner. So it's a really bad feeling that happens for women.
When you mention now about these problems that arise, I listened in preparation for this episode to your episode you did on Foreplay Radio back in February about discrepancies. And one thing which, in looking at the description, it was mentioned that it could also be an opportunity. I'd like to ask about that. How can a discrepancy in desire not only be a problem to overcome, but an opportunity to pursue?
Yeah. So, this problem, which is ubiquitous, I think, for many, many couples, probably the most frequent problem is the desire frequency problem. One person wants it more than the other, is an opportunity to discover what our partner is feeling inside. I would say, as I'm working with a couple, let's say, classically, she says, all he wants is sex. All he wants is to use my body. He's really not connected to me. I don't feel anything when we're sexual. I don't, I will give him sex just to get him off my back. But I don't even really at this point like it. So much here to unpack and to discover. And maybe he says, you know what? I do want more than that. I love her. I desperately love her. I want to give to her sexually. She doesn't really let me give to her sexually. And so she doesn't, and I understand she doesn't enjoy it, but I would do anything. I would stand on my head if that's what it took to please her sexually. And, I try talking to her, but it doesn't work. So, okay. So we're going to unpack both things. Let's stay for a minute in the sexual cycle, because there is this complication with the emotional cycle. So I would want to know from her in terms of what it feels like I want a moment. It's so much easier for me to see the whole pattern if I start with one example. So I would ask her, okay, tell me when he asks you for sex, I want her to really remember a moment where he asked, or it was the opportunity, and maybe it was the moment that they always have sex. It's, that's the day of the week that they have sex or something. And she's coming into it with dread. And I want to understand, what does the dread tell her? What is the message of the dread? Is it, I have to give myself when I'm not ready. I feel so vulnerable in this. My body doesn't get aroused. I don't know how to talk about this. I want to understand the meaning of it. I also want to understand her emotions. How does this dread impact her body? Because our bodies and our minds emotionally are connected. And if I can help her connect those things, especially for a sexual withdrawer, we're way ahead of the game. So I'll ask her, where is the dread in your body? Is it in your heart? Do you feel it heaviness on your chest? Do you feel that clenching in your gut? Does your body start to feel frozen? What is going on for you? What does it mean to be in dread? What do you tell yourself? Usually those negative emotions, we tell ourselves something about what our partner is doing. My partner doesn't care about me. That's what I'm telling myself. And of course, that may or may not be true, but it amplifies the sense of isolation and aloneness. And then underneath what we are thinking about what our partner is thinking about us, we also tell ourselves emotionally a meaning about ourselves. So it's the view of self. It's I might tell myself that I'm not a very good sexual partner, that I'm an inadequate woman, that I'll never be sexual. All these really quite dreadful messages that create so much pain in this moment. And then I want to ask, what is the protective function? What do you do? And it might be, I refuse. I go to bed early and I pretend that, I don't know that this is our night, or when he says, do you want to, I kind of roll my eyes again, which is kind of a pushback. Or maybe I say, okay, and I submit to it, but I'm not going to enter that moment. I'm not going to be present. I'm just going to do the thing that I got to do to get it over with. Or maybe I even say something like that dreadfully, okay, but can we get it over with quickly? Because I got to get to sleep. And then what I want to do is I want to understand how that protective function lands on their partner. It's oof, I want to make love to my wife. I want to be with her. And I get this terrible message that I'm a bother, that I'm too much, that I'm kind of a monster for wanting sex when they don't want it, that I'm invasive. And I just start to feel terrible. And then I want to know in that person, where the terribleness is. Where in their body do they feel that? Because I want to help them connect in their mind and in their body as well. And maybe it's, I just tell myself that, first of all, about her, right? We always look at the other first and we make something up about that. And we're not doing that intentionally. That's just the way our brain works. My partner is cold. My partner is never going to want it. And then I want to know about the view of self. Like, what is underneath that for you? It's like, well, I'm always going to be too much. Pursuers always feel like they're too much. Withdrawers always feel like they're too little. And then I'll say, well, what do you do with that? And maybe the protective function is like, look, at my body needs sex. So I just push forward. I just go for it anyway. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we can do it fast. It's okay. I'm going to go, I'll go as fast as I can. And in the meantime, because there's so little eroticism, I have to think about something else. So then I'm absent from the experience. I'm not really looking at my partner, thinking about my partner, because I've already decided that I'm rejected and my partner doesn't want me. So then I go away. I both push forward in the relationship, but in my mind, I go away. And of course, this creates a wooden experience sexually. They're not able to talk. So many couples don't have erotic language for how they want touch, how they feel about this experience. But the opportunity, Scott, is that if he can start to say, this is what happens for me. I go away because I feel so rejected, because I think she doesn't want me. And that deep peace keeps me from engaging with my heart in that moment. And she starts to hear that for the first time, like, oh, I do kind of notice you're absent. And I thought it was because I'm not good enough. I'm not sexy enough. I'm not the woman that you want. She's made up all these things about it. She doesn't know that he's going away to protect himself from rejection. And she can start to hear the real thing. And he can start to hear that, she's frozen, that she feels like she's not good enough, that she's going away because the experience itself for her is not very good. And she has no language to tell him what she needs. Then there's this mercy and empathy that happens in that painful place. It's actually in the moment of pain when they both begin to see each other, that the intention of the other was not to hurt, was not to go away, but it was protect themselves. And I think when we see that, the part of us that loves our partner like starts to melt. It's like, oh, this is why we're all messed up. You're not leaving me because you want to be somewhere else or with someone else. You're leaving me because you feel so rejected and you don't know how to do this. Or maybe you said no because you never really learned how to say yes. You never really learned how to tell me what you wanted and what joy there was for you in being touched. We haven't figured that out together. I think about, all the misinformation out there, like that intercourse is really how women climax. And, such a small percentage of women climax through sexual intercourse alone. Only like 15% of women climax that way. And I think everything says that they do. And that little bit, like if they could talk about it, it would be so transformative.
Thank you so much. We're wrapping. I mean, first of all, I just want to say, like, you're doing such a good job describing our work. This is what happens inside of couples and sex therapy. People they don't really get it. Like, they think that we teach people how to have sex. Mm-hmm. And I think that this idea of really talking about what is the meaning of sex, but also what is the meaning of our reactions and how we interact. And I think that you described it so beautifully. The last question I have, I think listeners, we try to offer the service to couples, many of whom really can't or aren't going to be going to therapy. And also many couples will say, look, we have this issue, but does it have to be about therapy? Can you give us tools that we can learn? How can we learn more about discovering our own dynamic dance, discovering our own way of being vulnerable together? What tools can we do on our own? And I'm wondering if you could provide that for our listeners.
Sure. And I know, and I think, going to a sex therapist the furthest thing from my mind. I would have never done that. It sounds so scary. Or even a couples therapist. Many of us don't grow up as that's an option to talk to people about our problems. No, too private. I would be, I would never consider that. So what can you do if you're not going to go to therapy? And I mean, certainly there are wonderful books and podcasts and things out there that they can start to hear about how other people solve these problems. But I would say kind of the first thing might be like, can I find language, that I am comfortable with and my partner is comfortable with, just describing my body and sex acts. I think this is a major piece where it goes wrong. The language that my partner uses, I think, is too crude, or the language that my partner uses, I think, is too scientific and leaves me cold. How can we find a mutual way of talking about our body parts, our body functions, and our sexual excitement and arousal, and the sex acts that we wish to do? Because if they could begin there, just like maybe make a list. This is what I call myself in the body, or my body parts. I call all these parts this. This is what I say in my head about particular sex acts, and have your partner do the same thing. And then, be brave and start to share these lists. And it may look really, really different, but they also might find that, can we find a common language? And I think that might be just one place to begin, so that they're speaking the same language.
Well, Dr. Laurie Watson, we're going to wrap up now, but this has been so helpful, and we're both very, very grateful that you joined us today on Intimate Judaism.
Thank you so much for having me. My heart is with Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
And thank all of you as well. Check out the website, intimatejudaism.com, for our archive. Subscribe to Intimate Judaism wherever you get your podcast. Continue sharing Intimate Judaism. Join us on Patreon. Write to us at intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com. We'll see you next time.
Bye.